The static was louder than usual in the cramped studio that evening, a relentless hum that filled every crevice with its unyielding presence. Elias sat hunched over his console, eyes bloodshot and fixed on the erratic waveforms that danced across the screen. His fingers moved almost mechanically, adjusting dials, replaying fragments of the hidden frequency, chasing after voices that seemed to slip further away with every listen. Mara stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching him with a blend of frustration and fear. The low light cast angular shadows across her sharp features, the short strands of hair framing her face like a shield. "Elias," she said quietly, her voice cutting through the static haze. "You need to stop. That obsession is killing you." He didn't look up. "I'm close, Mara. I can feel it. These voices, they're more than just noise. They're trapped, and I'm the only one who can help." "You're losing yourself," she pressed, stepping forward, the concern in her eyes unmistakable. "You haven't slept properly in days. You're talking about hallucinations like they're facts. And what about us? You're shutting me out." For a moment, Elias's hands faltered on the controls. The static filled the silence between them, a relentless reminder of the world he was so determined to Zavand, the one he was fracturing around himself. "I'm not shutting you out," he whispered, voice cracking. "I just need you to understand. This frequency, it's a lifeline. If I don't reach them, no one will." Mara's expression softened, but her resolve remained firm. "And what if you lose yourself in the process? What good is saving others if you're gone?" The storm outside raged on, lightning illuminating the city through the grimy windows, flickering like fractured memories. Elias turned to her then, eyes searching. "I don't know how to stop." "Not now." Their conversation spiraled into silence as the weight of unspoken fears settled between them. Days bled into nights with little rest, Elias's mind a battleground of static and shadows. The voices grew louder in his head, sometimes indistinguishable from the storm's own howling. Paranoia crept in, twisting his perceptions. He found himself double-checking equipment, suspecting invisible watchers, questioning even Mara's intentions. One night, on the rain-soaked rooftop overlooking the city, Mara confronted him again. The neon signs flickered erratically, casting eerie glows on their faces. "You're slipping away from me," she said, voice raw with emotion. "If you disappear into this obsession, I don't know if I can follow." Elias's reply was a whisper torn between hope and despair. "I'm trying to save them, but maybe I'm losing myself instead." The storm's electric charge crackled in the air, mirroring the tension between them. They stood apart, silhouettes against the fractured cityscape, the distance between them as palpable as the static that enveloped everything. Back inside, Elias's trembling hands grappled with the equipment, desperate to hold onto the fragile tether of reality. The broadcasts warped and shifted, bleeding into his thoughts. The line between what was real and imagined blurring with every pulse. Mara watched him, heart heavy, torn between fear for his sanity and unwavering loyalty. In the quiet afterward, at Mara's apartment, the city's storm dimmed to a distant murmur. They sat together in fragile silence, the room thick with the weight of what had been sedaned, left unsaid. In that stillness, a tentative understanding began to take root, fragile as the dawn light creeping through the blinds. But the fractures remained, a reminder that their bond, like the signals Elias chased, was fragile and fraught with uncertainty. The path ahead was unclear, the cost of connection steep, and the storm both external and internal far from over. As the night deepened, Elias's thoughts raced. Could he find balance between the consuming obsession and the fragile ties that anchored him? Or would the static finally claim him, silencing both his voice and the cause he was desperate to answer. The hum of the city outside whispered promises of both hope and dread, a reminder that some connections demanded sacrifice beyond measure. And as the first faint crackle of an elusive signal surfaced amidst the static, Elias knew the next step would define not just his fate, but the fate of the voices trapped beyond the storm. He reached for the controls once more, determination flickering in his tired eyes. The journey was far from over. The rooftop was an island amid the tempest, a battleground where storm and city clashed in a cacophony of raw energy. Elias Vaughn stood at its edge, the modified transdimensional device strapped securely to his chest, glowing faintly with a cold blue light that seemed almost unnatural against the dark, flickering sky. Lightning stitched jagged seams across the horizon, illuminating the endless sheets of rain that hammered down like 1,000 tiny fists. The static was louder here, a deafening hum that thrummed in his bones and whispered secrets in every crackle. His breath came in ragged bursts, the cold air burning his lungs with each inhale. The city sprawled beneath him, a maze of neon lights and shadowed alleys, but it felt distant, disconnected from the tempest that raged above. Tonight was the night he would cross the threshold, descend into the liminal space that had mocked him through the static for so long. Elias Mara's voice crackled through the earpiece, steady but strained, the storms intensifying. "Are you sure you want to do this now?" He swallowed hard, his fingers tightening around the device's controls. "I have to. If I don't take the step now, the connection will be lost." The voices, they're fading. A sharp crack of thunder rolled overhead, shaking the very air. Elias pressed the activation button. The device pulsed, a wave of electromagnetic energy rippling outward, distorting the space around him. The world blurred, colors bleeding into one another as edges lost definition. He felt his body dissolve into the noise, the tactile reality of the rooftop slipping away. Suddenly, he was somewhere else, or perhaps everywhere at once. The liminal space was a fractured mirror of the city. Buildings twisted into impossible angles, their surfaces shimmering like heat haze. Neon signs flickered erratically, their messages garbled and half-formed. The sky above was a roiling canvas of static and storm clouds, fractured by jagged bolts of light that seemed to crack the space itself. Voices floated through the haze, fragile, desperate, pleading. They whispered his name, weaving sorrow and hope into their tangled chorus. Elias reached out, trying to grasp the intangible threads, but they slipped through his fingers like smoke. His heart pounded as the boundaries between reality and hallucination blurred. He saw flashes of another world layered beneath this one, shadowy figures trapped behind invisible barriers, eyes wide with silent screams. The static was alive here, a sentient veil that both concealed and imprisoned. Back in the studio, Mara's gaze was fixed on the monitors, her fingers dancing across keyboards as she fought to stabilize the feed. The storm's interference was relentless, scrambling signals and threatening to sever their fragile link. "Elias, can you hear me?" she called into the void. His voice was a fragile thread. "Louder, Mara. The voices, they're here. I can feel them." Dr. Kalen Sato appeared beside her, eyes shadowed behind thick glasses. "The electromagnetic flux is off the charts. If you lose him now, we might never recover the connection." Mara's jaw clenched. "We won't lose him. Not tonight." Within the liminal space, Elias stumbled forward, the distorted cityscape shifting beneath his feet. The voices grew louder, more insistent, filling his mind with a torrent of emotions: fear, sorrow, yearning. It was overwhelming, a flood that threatened to drown his senses. He collapsed to his knees, breath ragged, as a surge of static engulfed him. The voices coalesced into a single, desperate plea: "Help us." Tears blurred his vision. This was no longer just a mystery to unravel, it was a call to arms, a burden he could not ignore. The storm outside raged on, mirroring the tempest within his mind. As he struggled to rise, the edges of the liminal space began to fray, shadows lengthening and twisting into dark shapes that threatened to sever his tenuous hold on reality. The silent authority was closing in. Their presence felt even here, a cold, mechanical whisper in the static. Elias gritted his teeth, clutching the device tightly. "I won't let you silence them, not while I'm here." Lightning struck overhead, illuminating the liminal nexus where worlds converged. The fate of both realms hung in the balance, the fragile channel between them trembling on the brink of collapse. His descent had begun, and there was no turning back. The night deepened as Elias pressed forward, guided by the echoes of the trapped voices. The liminal space was a labyrinth of overlapping realities, each step revealing new fragments of the Storia world caught in stasis, suffering in silence beneath the storm's unyielding gaze. He encountered spectral manifestations, flickering forms that mirrored his own doubts and fears. They whispered secrets and warnings, trying to shake his resolve. Yet, amidst the chaos, a strange clarity emerged. The voices were more than data. They were souls tethered by pain and hope. Time dilated, stretched thin between moments of lucidity and overwhelming distortion. Elias fought to maintain his grip on the mission and on himself, the line between savior and sacrifice blurring with every pulse of static. Back in the studio, Mara and Dr. Sato coordinated efforts to reinforce the connection. Their voices were anchors, tethering Elias to the known world even as he ventured further into the unknown. "Stay with us, Elias," Mara urged, her voice breaking through the storm's fury. He nodded, though she could not see him. "I'm here. For them. For us all." The liminal descent was a journey into the heart of isolation and connection, a perilous dance between worlds that would test the limits of human endurance and empathy. Elias's sacrifice was just beginning, and the echoes of his choice would resonate far beyond the storm. The chapter closes on Elias standing at the eye of the liminal storm, the voices surrounding him in a fragile embrace, the boundary between worlds thinning to a razor's edge. The question remains, can he bridge the divide without losing himself to the static's haunting song? The air inside the liminal zone was thick with a palpable static, yet beneath it pulsed an eerie silence that seemed to press against my eardrums. Shadows flickered and shifted around me like restless phantoms, their forms half glimpsed, yet unmistakably human. Each step I took sent ripples through the ambient hum, fracturing the tenuous veil separating our worlds. I gripped the worn edges of my portable receiver, its screen flickering erratically, as if struggling to anchor itself in this unstable reality. The trapped voices wove around me, their whispers fragile but insistent. They were not mere echoes, but entities caught in the interstice, their suffering etched in every tremor of the signal. A sudden chill brushed the back of my neck, a presence manifesting just beyond perception. From the shifting gloom emerged a figure, my own reflection, but distorted, spectral, and cold. The doppelganger's eyes bore into me, hollow yet accusing, reflecting the fears and guilt I had buried beneath years of isolation. "Why do you linger here, Elias?" The apparition seemed to ask without words. "What do you hope to save when you yourself are breaking?" I faltered, the weight of my obsession pressing down like the crushing storm outside. The boundary between my mind and the liminal space blurred, hallucinations and reality entwining into a chaotic dance. Yet, Within that chaos, I found a sliver of clarity of purpose that transcended the static noise. Suddenly, a cold, mechanical voice cut through the spectral murmurs. Connection unstable. Severance imminent. It intoned the unmistakable signature of the silent authority. Their presence was a shadow cast over this fragile sanctuary, an oppressive force bent on maintaining the veil between worlds. Their interference grew more aggressive, signals jamming, echoes of digital snarls disrupting the delicate communion I had forged. I fought to steady my breathing, to anchor myself against the rising tide of disorientation. The trapped voices surged in intensity, their pleas a chorus of desperation and hope. I reached out, hands trembling, to touch the flickering forms' ghostly silhouettes, shimmering with ephemeral light. Their eyes, filled with silent suffering, locked onto mine, and in that moment I understood the depth of their imprisonment. Through the haze of static and shadow, I found strength. The spectral reflection of my fears wavered and dissolved as I embraced the connection fully, letting the voices fill the void inside me. This was not merely a battle of technology or will, it was a communion of fractured souls seeking redemption through one another. As the mechanical voice of the silent authority grew louder, threatening to sever the link, I steeled myself for the coming storm. The liminal space trembled, its fragile boundaries quivering under the assault. But I would not yield, for the voices, for the lost, for myself would stand against the silence. The echoes of my heartbeat mingled with the distant thunder beyond the veil, a steady reminder that even in the darkest static, life persisted. And with that thought, I pushed forward into the unknown, ready to face whatever lay beyond the storm. The studio was suffocating under a thick blanket of static that no longer whispered but screamed. Elias sat slumped in his chair, eyes fixed on the flickering monitors that had once been his window to another world. Now, they were nothing but broken glass reflecting a fractured reality. The equipment, once his trusted companion, had betrayed him. Circuits fried, signals drowned in relentless interference. The cold hum of failure filled the room, a mechanical dirge that echoed the turmoil within his mind. He reached out hesitantly, fingers brushing the cracked speaker cone, the last fragile conduit of the voices he had come to know so intimately. The static pulsed ominously, as if mocking his efforts, each wave a reminder of the connection slipping through his grasp. The voices, the desperate pleas, the fragile hopes were now drowned in a void of silence that threatened to consume not just the signals, but his very purpose. Time slipped unnoticed until the door burst open with a sharp crack, rainwater splattering across the worn floorboards. Mara stood there, soaked and breathless, her sharp eyes blazing with urgency. "Elias," she said, voice steady yet edged with worry, "you need to stop this. You need to rest." He shook his head, voice hoarse. "I can't. Not yet. The voices, they're still out there. I have to reach them." Mara stepped closer, her presence a tether to the world he was fading from. "And I'm going to help you, but you can't do this alone." Outside, the city writhed beneath storm-darkened skies, neon lights flickering like dying stars. The oppressive hum of the electrical tempest seeped through the walls, a constant reminder of the forces conspiring to silence him. Minutes later, Dr. Kalen Sato arrived, his pale figure framed by the dim hallway light. He moved with the precision of a surgeon, his fingers deftly adjusting dials and rewiring connections among the tangled mess of equipment. His glasses caught the glow of flickering screens, reflecting a mind grappling with the impossible. "The interference is unlike anything I've seen," he muttered. "It's adaptive, overwhelming. But there's a pattern. If we can isolate it, perhaps we can counteract it." Elias watched, a mix of hope and desperation burning behind tired eyes. The scientist's cold determination was a fragile lifeline in a sea of chaos. Hours passed in a blur of static and whispered calculations. Yet, despite their efforts, the signals remained broken, fragmented beyond comprehension. Elias felt the walls of his sanity closing in, memories and hallucinations blurring the line between reality and the haunting broadcasts. The voices sometimes echoed in his thoughts, distorted cries slipping through the cracks of his fractured mind. In a rare moment of clarity, Elias spoke softly, "What if this is it? What if the static wins?" Mara's hand found his, grounding him. "Then we fight harder, because there's more at stake than just sound. There's hope." The night deepened, the storm outside reaching a crescendo. Elias stared at the darkened monitors, a silent promise forming in his heart. The connection might be broken, but the voices were not lost. Somewhere beyond the storm, beyond the static, they waited on. He would find a way back to them. As the first hints of dawn crept through rain-streaked windows, a faint pulse flickered on the screener, fragile heartbeat in the void. Elias's breath caught. The signal had not died. Not yet. With renewed resolve, he whispered into the stillness, "I'm coming." The storm raged on, but within the shattered silence, a new hope was born. The studio was a sanctuary of shadows and static, a cocoon where the hum of electricity and the faint crackle of interference were constant companions. Elias sat hunched over his console, fingers trembling slightly as he made final adjustments to the device that had consumed his every waking thought for weeks. The repaired apparatus, a tangled mesh of wires and salvaged components, now pulsed with a steady blue lighter beacon in the otherwise dim and cluttered room. A faint vibration thrummed through the air, a subtle shift in the static that signaled something new, something different. Elias's heart pounded as he leaned in, eyes fixed on the wavering lines across the screen. The familiar hiss of white noise was punctuated by something else, a pattern, a rhythm, a voice. "Listen," Elias whispered, barely daring to break the fragile silence. Mara, standing close behind him, leaned forward, her sharp eyes narrowing as she scanned the audio waveforms. The room seemed to hold its breath. From the speakers emerged a voice, fragile, trembling, layered beneath the interference, but undeniably human. "Help. Trapped. Please." The words were disjointed, fragmented, but their desperate urgency cut through the static like a knife. Mara's breath hitched, a rare crack in her usual pragmatism. "Elias, they're real." Across the room, Dr. Kalon Sato adjusted his glasses, his pale face etched with a mixture of fascination and dread. "This transmission, it's unlike anything I've encountered. The energy signatures suggest a dimensional bleed-in overlap created by the city's storms. But the psychological toll, the voices, they speak of imprisonment beyond physical confinement." Elias swallowed hard, his own mind racing to grasp the implications. The voices weren't just echoes or hallucinations. They were trapped consciousnesses, prisoners of a liminal space forged by the city's relentless electrical storms. Each plea was a thread in a tapestry of silent suffering, woven into signals that defied conventional science. "They're suffering," Elias murmured, voice thick with emotion. "And it's because of us, because of this city, this storm, this interference." Mara placed a steadying hand on his shoulder. "Then we have to do something." The device crackled again, and a new message began to form, longer, clearer. The voices spoke of fractures in reality, of a cost paid in isolation and pain, their existence tethered precariously between worlds. They described attempts to reach out, to connect, only to be met with silence or suppression. The message was a call for rescue, a plea to break the chains of their multidimensional prison. Dr. Sato's voice was low, almost reverent. This is the cost of crossing worlds, the sacrifice of identity, stability, even sanity. If we interfere recklessly, we risk everything. Elias felt a weight settle in his chest, the enormity of the task dawning on him. This was no longer a mere investigation or a technical challenge, it was a mission fraught with peril, with stakes that transcended his own survival. "We can't turn away," he said firmly, eyes meeting Mara's. "They trusted us to listen. Now, we have to find a way to answer." Outside, the city groaned under the relentless storm, flashes of lightning illuminating the rain-slicked streets. Inside the studio, the trio sat in a heavy silence, the haunting message playing on repeat. The voices from beyond the static were no longer distant whispers, they were a summons, a responsibility. Elias's fingers hovered over the controls, a mixture of dread and determination coursing through him. The path ahead was uncertain and dangerous, but the reverberations of this moment would echo far beyond the confines of his studio. The storm outside raged on, but within, a fragile hope flickered amidst the static.